Welkom bij Ouderverstoting Overwinnen. Vandaag gaan we kijken naar een dame die pas sinds een jaar weet dat haar moeder haar probeerde te verstoten, te alienaten van haar vader. Hier kwam ze achter nadat zij zelf ook een kind heeft gekregen. Nu is ze een kanaal gestart, Anti-Alienation Project, waarin zij dus andere ouders en kinderen helpt om hiermee om te gaan. En vandaag gaat ze het hebben over parentificatie. Parentificatie is het fenomeen waarbij het kind wordt ingezet om de emoties van de ouder, de ouder die aan het verstoten is, om eigenlijk daarvoor te gaan zorgen. Dus dat kind wordt de ouder.
Today I want to talk about one of the alienator's traps. How they make the child reliant on them. Basically how they keep the child in this bond, this trauma bond. Now alienators have several traps, and the trap we're going to be focusing on today is called parentification. As always, I want to just make a note that I'm not a medical professional, not a doctor, not a therapist, simply someone who was alienated from the child's point of view for 20 years. I figured everything out last year, and now I'm speaking out about this form of abuse. A little bit about me is that I'm the oldest child of 5. I'm also the only girl, so I have 4 younger brothers, and I think that I was dealing with parentification probably from the time I could take care of a younger brother, 5, 6 years old, but it really got worse around my parents' divorce. That time I was 9 years old, and the parentification really set in. So what is parentification? Parentification is basically turning the parent and the child on its head. And the child is forced to provide emotional support or practical support for their parent instead of being the one to receive that as a child. In a way, the child becomes the caregiver. The result of parentification is that the child is forced to assume adult responsibilities and adult behaviors before they are ready to do so. As you might be able to imagine, when the responsibilities like this are shifted on its head, this is going to cause a lot of disruptions for the child's own development. The consequences on the child, emotional and physical well-being, cannot be stressed enough. The impacts are far-reaching and last into adulthood, sometimes for an entire lifetime. There are 2 types of parentification: instrumental parentification and emotional parentification. The big difference between these 2 is that instrumental parentification involves children taking on practical responsibilities, such as cooking, babysitting the younger siblings, cleaning the house, even paying bills, taking care of their parent if they have a physical or mental illness, anything that's practical. Whereas emotional parentification involves a child providing emotional support to a parent. This includes listening to a parent talk about their problems, offering advice to the parent, mediating between a parent and another family member, serving as a confidant for their parent, and providing emotional comfort and support to a parent. In my case, I had a little bit of both instrumental and emotional parentification. Most of the parentification I experienced, however, was emotional parentification. And I do think this is very common for alienated kids. This is not just my own experience. I have spoken with about a dozen other people who've been through this from the child's point of view, and pretty much all of us have dealt with parentification. I've always felt like I was treated like my mom's therapist, just emotional caretaker. I was the person she came to for advice, and I never felt qualified to give that advice. I was the person that she would come to when she was emotional, in tears, or really angry and upset with a friend or a family member or even a stranger, and I was the person to talk her down. And she came to me with her problems. She came to me with everything. As a mother myself, I struggle to understand how a parent can do this and why a parent would do this. I know that a lot of this is generational. I believe that my mom experienced this as well, but she just doesn't see it as dysfunctional.
Nou, ze is heel aardig. Wat weten we nu? Haar moeder had waarschijnlijk een persoonlijkheidsstoornis. Geen empathie voor haar eigen kind. Kind is een verlengstuk van de narcistische ouder. Dus die komt met alle problemen. En je weet niet eens of die problemen ook echt waar waren. Nee, ze wilde gewoon attention, zielig zijn voor haar kind. En het kind gaat zich dan verantwoordelijk voelen voor de emoties van in dit geval moeder. Dus het gebeurt op allerlei gebieden, dus ook met de andere ouder. Het kind gaat zich ook verantwoordelijk voelen om de ouder te beschermen van in dit geval haar vader. En daarom moet het loyaal zijn aan die moeder. En daarom gaat het de vader verstoten. Dat is eigenlijk ook een gedeelte parentificatie. Het kind moet zorgen dat de vader uit de buurt blijft van moeder.
I think it is a learned behavior, but at some point you can unlearn these things, and at some point you can realize what you're doing is having a harmful effect on your child. If you are interested in knowing reasons for parentification, there are several. Parentification is more likely to occur if the parent has a substance use disorder or addiction, if the parent has a serious medical condition or is disabled, if a parent does not have sufficient emotional support from other adults in their lives, if the parent experienced neglect and abuse as a child themselves, or if a parent suffers from mental illness. Also, catastrophes in the life of the family can lead or cause parentification to start. For example, financial hardships, divorce, or a really serious illness of a sibling can cause conditions that may lead to parentification. Is parentification trauma? Parentification can cause what's known as relational trauma. In other words, the bond between the child and parent is broken, is severed, is disrupted. Relational trauma occurs in childhood when the parent starts to rely on their child for emotional support. Parentification has also been proven to cause chronic stress in the child because the child is not receiving the support or protection they need. And it's important to realize that parentification is not only a short-term destruction for the mental and emotional health of the child. There are long-term impacts on the child's life, well-being, self-esteem, personality, the list goes on. There's also a correlation with time and the negative consequences on the child. So the earlier that the parentification starts in the life of the child, the worse outcomes that can be predicted for that child. Let's talk about the dangers of parentification. As you might imagine, one huge danger of parentification is that the child is unable to emotionally regulate themselves. Because they've been so focused on regulating their parents' emotions for years or even decades, they neglect their own emotional well-being. Another danger of parentification is trust and the inability to trust other people. This comes out particularly when alienated children and parentified children start to get older and want to have romantic relationships of their own. Often these children, like myself, have a really difficult time opening up and trusting other people, particularly in their romantic relationships. They don't know the healthy boundaries to have with other people who are they're close with in their lives. And because of that, they struggle with getting their own needs met.
Ja, en wat ik pas zag op een heel mooi kanaal van... het heet de Huberman Lab Channel. Dat is een neuroscientist, die praat hierover. En die geeft ook aan... dezelfde neuronen in het brein, die gaan over de hechting. Dus tussen de hechting tussen het kind en de ouder. Moeder of vader. Die worden ook gebruikt voor de hechting aan een romantische partner. Dus als die eerste hechting niet goed is, dan gaat het bij een romantische partner ook verkeerd. Dus dat is de reden waarom je bijvoorbeeld in je werkleven totaal geen problemen kan hebben. Maar zit je eenmaal in een romantische relatie, dan heb je er wel problemen mee. Dus dat komt dat het gebruik maakt van diezelfde systemen. En als kind ben je dus verantwoordelijk voor, in haar geval, en was ook in mijn geval als kind, voor de emotie van je moeder. Dus je waakzaamheidssensoren van de amygdala, die staan constant aan. Gaat het wel goed met mijn moeder? Wordt ze verdrietig? Wat moet ik eraan doen om te helpen? Dus dit zijn ook de mensen die later ook vaak een relatie aangaan met zo'nzelfde persoon. Omdat ze dat gewend zijn en gewend zijn om te zorgen voor die anderen en niet om te kijken naar zichzelf. Dus luister je naar, heb je dit meegemaakt? Zorg eerst dat je dat hebt geheeld in jezelf. Daarna ben je gewoon minder vatbaar voor de streken van de narcist.
Parentified children can also suffer with underlying trauma that causes a wide variety of issues as these children try to cope with all of the trauma that they've dealt with. And this can include depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, the list goes on. Parentified teenager or child usually displays symptoms, and these are really destructive. First of all, anxiety. Anxiety about others, anxiety about caring for others, depression. suicidality, compulsive overworking in order to fulfill responsibilities at home or at school. I still deal with this. It's crazy. I just can't relax. I can't let myself relax. I feel like I always need to be doing something. Feelings of guilt and shame. I know what that's like. I think that the feelings of guilt and shame for parentified children specifically are often a result of putting yourself first and putting your own needs first. Can cause a feeling of guilt and shame, like you don't deserve to do that. Unrelenting worry, check. Social isolation, I've been there. Physical symptoms of anxiety and depression such as stomach aches, headaches. Yeah. Long-term effects of parentification.
Ik ga het denk ik ook in de toekomst over hebben van, ik heb ook al die, veel daarvan heb ik ook gehad, maar ik heb heel veel aan mezelf gewerkt en ik heb al die stressoren weggehaald. Dus ik heb daar absoluut geen last meer van. Ik zie aan haar, als je kijkt naar de video, bij haar zie ik nog echt wel de trauma erin zitten. Dus zij moet daar ook nog aan werken. Maar dat komt hopelijk, gaat het binnenkort komen.
In all the research I've done, I found that parentification absolutely lasts until adulthood or throughout adulthood. Everybody knows that adverse childhood experiences, especially look up the ACEs and do an ACE score, increases the likelihood of mental and physical health problems throughout one's lifetime. This is so scary because the ongoing stress that parentification will cause for a child actually damages their brain. What happens is the ongoing stressful experience changes the brain, shrinking the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that regulates memory, emotion, and stress management. So part of their brain, the hippocampus, literally shrinks, atrophies, because of the chronic stress these children are under. There is a researcher, Dr. Lisa Hooper, who has done some amazing research on parentification. Her and her colleagues have actually come up with a parentification scale, and you can find out where you or your friend or your sibling or your loved one is on the parentification scale using the parentification inventory. So there's a list of statements, and you respond by choosing a number 1 through 5. 1 means this is never true for me, and 5 means it's always true for me, to describe one's experience. Parents can ask their children to answer yes or no to the following questions, or you yourself, if you have been through parentification, you can answer these questions yourself, 1 through 5. I'm going to read these off because I think some people might find it helpful. It might be helpful to get a pen and paper and just quickly jot down these numbers as I write out the statements. Let's start. It seems like family members are always bringing me their problems. In my family, I often feel called upon to do more than my share. I often feel more like an adult than a child in my family. I often feel like a referee. I often make sacrifices that go unnoticed by other family members. At times, I feel I am the only one my mother or father can turn to. I often find myself feeling down for no particular reason that I can think of. In my family, there are certain family members I can handle better than anyone else. I am very active in the management of my family's financial affairs. My parents have enough to do without worrying about housework as well. I am very uncomfortable when things aren't going well at home. It often seems that my families aren't taken into account in my family. I initiate most free time activities. I am at my best in times of crisis. It seems like there are enough problems at home without me causing more. If one of my family members is upset, I almost always become involved in some way. I often resent being asked to do certain kinds of jobs. I often prefer the company of people older than me. I am frequently responsible for the physical care of some members of my family. I am often described as mature for my age. It seems that I am usually the one held responsible for most of what happens. If you can relate to these descriptors now or during your childhood, it's quite possible that you have experienced parentification. About parentification and alienation, I'll just give you my personal opinion. When your alienator makes you, the child, feel responsible for not only their emotional well-being, but sometimes their physical well-being. You're constantly worried about how they're doing, if they're okay, what they need you to do for them. The list goes on. You become so aware of how they're feeling at all times. It creates an environment where you're walking on eggshells. This goes back to the chronic stress, which was mentioned before, and how that actually shrinks the part of your brain, the hippocampus, that's responsible for memory and emotional regulation.
Ja, dus het wordt ook erger, want het kind wordt dus verantwoordelijk gemaakt voor de gevoelens van de narcistische ouder. Maar het kind zal het ook nooit goed doen, want het is een narcistische ouder. Of heeft borderline. Dus het kind zal proberen te helpen. En ook hierin weer zal die ouder iedere keer iets vinden waardoor het niet goed genoeg is. Dus niet alleen maar is het kind verantwoordelijk voor de ouder, het doet het ook nooit goed. Dus dan snap je wel dat de stresslevels omhoog gaan. Goed nieuws, op latere leeftijd kan je daarmee mee omgaan, want het brein is plastisch. Dat wil zeggen, het kan veranderen.
Something else too. The alienated child is in this really dysfunctional position where they believe that their alienator needs them in order to be okay. They believe their alienator needs them in order to manage their emotions, in order to be happy, in order to be all right in the world. There's a sense as an alienated child that your alienator, because of parentification too, will not survive without you. And because you love your parent, this causes a situation where you're trapped. If you take it a step further, because of that aspect of parentification, to make any move to get closer to your targeted parent or to make any attempts to see or spend time with your targeted parent, you know that's going to cause emotional turbulence in your alienator that you're going to have to take care of, that you're going to have to help them through. And it's a double whammy because you will be causing it by reaching out to your targeted parent. So because of the parentification, that alienated child is chronically aware of how their words, actions, and decisions are going to impact their alienator and their emotional landscape. What happens in parentification is that the parentified child has to naturally put their own needs second to their parent. And in doing so, they have to put their parent and their parents' needs first all the time. When this relates to alienation, the child in needing to put their parents' needs first all the time means naturally they need to remain distant, or they need to keep rejecting the targeted parent because that's what their parent needs. And the child becomes so accustomed to neglecting their own wants and needs and accustomed to muting their own voice that they end up just being controlled by their parent. They end up giving up all control in order to care for their parent. And that's what their parent demands of them. And especially when you're a younger kid and you don't really know better, this can seem normal because you don't know better. And you don't have the knowledge or the perspective to realize that, in fact, everything is backwards. There's this overwhelming feeling that kids who've been parentified have, and that's that their parents not going to be okay without them. And I've been there too. I've actually worried like maybe they won't survive without me, because that has been enforced for years, again and again and again.
Dus nog een keer, korte samenvatting. Dit is heel belangrijk. Het kind krijgt dus te horen van die narcistische ouder: ik ben een slachtoffer van vader. Kind, jij bent ook een slachtoffer van vader. Het gaat slecht met mij als jij positief bent over vader. En het gaat goed met mij als jij mij al je aandacht geeft en de vader afstoot. Dit heeft te maken met hechting. Puur, dit is de kern. Het kind moet overleven. Kan niet overleven met, in dit geval, de vader. Moet trekken naar moeder. Moet de eigen emoties opzij zetten, want wat doet de narcistische ouder nog meer? Als het kind maar iets zegt over de eigen emoties, zal het negativiteit krijgen van diezelfde ouder. Dus, wat is de logische oplossing? Eigen emoties verdrukken. Alles doen en in dienst zijn van de narcistische ouder. En de andere ouder afstoten. Als je zo ziet, het is heel logisch wat het kind doet. Dat het niet weet hoe het zit, is logisch. Want dit gaat allemaal onbewust. Het onbewuste wordt getraind. En daardoor ga je ook zien dat omdat het dus het eigen gevoel moet wegdrukken, zie je dus ook dat het ook de empathie kan verliezen. Hoeft niet altijd.
And so that just causes one more trap for the child to stay in this false reality. That's all for this video. I hope you guys learned something or had some type of insight about parentification and alienation. By the way, I got my t-shirt. I got extra large because I like my shirts pretty big. How to legally steal a child. Parental alienation.
Mooi t-shirt. Wat ik wel apart vind is, er wordt altijd gesproken ook over die loyaliteit. Maar ik had met mijn moeder, lang geleden alweer, als kind, ik denk rond mijn 12e, doorzag ik dat. Ik zag, wat zij doet is niet goed. Het lijkt alsof zij gek is. En ik keek altijd naar haar met een afstand. Dus ik had heel die loyaliteit niet. En ik had dat verantwoordelijkheidsgevoel had ik niet. Ik weet niet precies wat dat is. Het kan zijn dat het is omdat ik daarmee, dat een kind daarmee wordt geboren. Je hebt die fight, flight, freeze methode. Dus het ene kind gaat erin mee en die gaat zich loyaal voelen. Ik had het juist niet. Ik nam juist die afstand en probeerde het van... Ik zag nooit iets van, oh, ik ben daar verantwoordelijk voor. Iedere keer als zij daarmee begon, dus zij begon ook met haar problemen te vertellen van haar werk. En ik kapte dat altijd af. Ik werd daarvoor afgestraft, maar ik had nooit het idee van, oh, ik moet haar helpen. Als ik iets doe, dan voelt zij zich beter. Ik weet niet precies waarom dat is, maar het is dus niet altijd zo dat je te maken krijgt met parentificatie met zo'n narcistische ouder. Veel heeft ook te maken met het kind zelf.
I really love this shirt. It's super comfy. If you're interested...
Ze ging verder met het shirt. Ga naar haar kanaal toe als je meer wil weten vanuit het perspectief van een kind wat net is wakker geworden. Zij heeft weer een relatie aangegaan met haar... ze is weer een relatie aangegaan met haar vader. Maar het mooie is, het is allemaal vers. En ze heeft het kanaal nu gemaakt, dus je kan het meteen horen. Voor mij is het alweer meer dan 20 jaar geleden. Voor haar is het allemaal vers. Dus ga naar haar kanaal. Bedankt voor het luisteren. En we gaan verder met de volgende aflevering. Bedankt voor het luisteren. Oh ja, geef een like, subscribe.